I've been attending his memorial to the grave every year. I'm proud to be able to still be alive at my time to go to his memorial.
Today we are going to place our wreaths, and we are delighted to have you all with us again as you have come over these many years and placed your wreaths at the grave.
And the other thing about that service is that you find that Josephine, I'm pretty sure that Josephine is holding the umbrella over her father at that service. Albert Jacka was obviously an adventurous youth. As a young boy, he was older than his two younger brothers, and they were his little gang. And one day they were standing in front of their grandmother's house in Wedderburn, and suddenly they could see a fire. I think it was a hotel was on fire up in the main street in Wedderburn. And the way that Bill Jacka describes it in many years later was that Albert immediately saw the fire and said, "Let's go, boys." So he was their leader, and he was adventurous. He had that adventurous spirit, and I think he showed that throughout his career. Albert was 20 when he enlisted at Heathcote. He was working up there in the Victorian Forestries Department around Heathcote, and he immediately, his adventurous spirit came back to him, or came to him again, and he went and enlisted. But something went wrong with that. He had to enlist again, so he actually enlisted twice. But Bill was a good deal younger. He was less than 18 at the time. And so Bill didn't immediately enlist. It was further down the track, but so he had to get his mother's permission to enlist.
So Jack is famous Victoria Cross had a much bigger impact on the entire Gallipoli campaign about most people are aware of.
Absolutely. I think this is a sort of a little forgotten corner of the history of Gallipoli, because that day, on the 20th of May, 1915, was the morning of the biggest push that the Turks made ever since the landing. And so 40,000 Turks were brought into the trenches and attacked the Australian line. The Australians expended something like 980,000 rounds of ammunition in stopping them. And something like 7,000 to 8,000 Turks were killed out in no man's land. And probably another 10 to 15,000 were probably wounded out in no man's land. So they probably inflicted a lot of damage on the Turks. But there was one section of the whole entire Australian line where the Turks broke through, and that was at Courtney's Post, right next to where Jacka was standing. And a dozen Turks broke into that section of the trench. It was only 21 feet across, that section of the trench. Jacka had pinned them down for 15 minutes until reinforcements arrived. Now, if Jacka had not been there to do that, what is little known is the fact that Jacka was to their right, but to their left was a machine gun post just around the corner from where they were, with two machine guns, Australian machine guns, firing, suppressing the advance of the Turks, 40,000 Turks coming for them. Now, if the Turks had not been distracted by Jacka's fire and had woken up to the fact that their biggest impact on the campaign would have been just to go around that corner and destroy those 2 Australian machine guns. If they'd have done that, it may well have been the case that with the reduced firepower, that whole section of Courtney's Post could have been overrun. And if Courtney's Post had been overrun, then that could have split the whole Australian line and could ultimately have led to the destruction of Anzac. So my thesis is that if you look at all of the VCs of World War I, and I can't say that I've looked at every single one of them, but I'm trying to think of a situation that was as critical as this particular situation that was there on the 20th of May, 1915, where the impact of one person's bravery had such a huge potential impact on the AIF. And I don't think, I mean, it would be worthy of analysis to see, but I don't think that we could probably find another situation where it was that critical.
Would the Turkish ground reach the bases that they got?
It's quite possible. It's quite possible because if they got over Courtney's Post and then they started to just go down Shrapnel Valley, into eventually getting to the beach. So yeah, I think that that's quite possible. And of course, the AIF did have plans to fall back to Pluggy's Plateau, and they had a line of trenches there as well. But and so then maybe they could have held on, but it could have created total chaos for the Australian position. Now, I must say that I'm not talking about the bravery aspect of what he did there, because I actually think that in terms of just a straight man-to-man combat military action, what Jacka did at Pozières in 1916, exceeds, and we're probably going to talk about that, what he did at Gallipoli. But Gallipoli, his Gallipoli action, certainly he was the right person to have in that position at that time. He did have an impact. Yes, the thing is that it was about was it 50 prisoners, I think, or something like that from the 48th Battalion. Because the Germans had pounded those trenches all night and had basically wiped out Jacka's platoon almost completely. I mean, he was down to 10 men and then 8 men because the grenade that came down into his dugout. But he had resistance to go into the dugout, but because he knew that if they're not up there, this kind of thing can happen. They'll come through and we'll be dead anyway, and they'll get us in the dugout. But having lost 2/3 of his platoon already, he relented and went into the dugout. So because that hole had been created and everybody had been killed or forced into dugouts, that gave that German that group of Germans to come through, and then they wheeled around behind the 48 and captured them. Took them by surprise because they didn't expect someone to be coming from behind. And then those men were being taken back through the lines, and that's when Jacka's group of 8 men stood in their way and did the famous charge, which disoriented the Germans because they thought that it couldn't, where there's 85 of us or something, we've got 50 Australian prisoners. There's no way that it's just 8 men coming for us. It was just completely audacious. But I think it was just a reflection of Jacka's wonderful tactical nous that he had. He could get into a situation and just do the calculation very quickly of whether what he was going to do was possible or not. And of course, I think he had a bit of luck on his side all the time. More than luck. Well, he should have been killed on a number of occasions. So it was freakish that he could survive. I think that by now Jacka was speaking up for the men. He obviously didn't have a very good relationship with his commanding, with his CO, Colonel Dare, Colonel Charles Dare, and the other thing is that it was just a confusion of the battle as well. Everybody's knocked out. Jacka's knocked out. People that saw it might not be around. And we do know that Jacka's friend Ted Rule, he walked into the CO's office at one stage, and he just saw his notepad and just lifted it up and saw the text of the recommendation, because Ted had actually watched it himself. He could see the silhouettes of 100 and something, 120 or 30 men going at each other on the ridge, and Jacka's incredible fight there, where it said that he may have accounted for 12 to 15 Germans single-handedly. So Ted had watched this, and he was astonished to find that the recommendation that was being put forward just downgraded what Jacka had done, and had not actually hadn't delved into it enough to find out what had done. Because for example, he said Jacka led his platoon in against the Germans, and that made it sound like he had 33 men. Or no, not 33, they had about 50. That's modern platoons. In those days, you had about 50, 55 men in a platoon. So it made it sound like he had a whole group of people with him, whereas actually it was a very small group of people that he had, and his bravery was enormous. And it was something that later on was commented on by the official historian, Charles Bean, who said that it was the most audacious and successful action of any individual action of the AIF during World War I. So effectively, if you took the standard of VCs from what Jacka did at Pozières and awarded that VC to Jacka and said nothing below that, what he was saying was that no one else would have got a VC in World War I. So to have no VC awarded, or military cross awarded in those circumstances was an outrage.
It's important to note too, I think, that by the time Jack agreed, the Germans still were going to go.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Effectively, yes. Effectively, it was, and he was really relying, effectively in doing that, he was relying on the 50 captives, the Aussie captives, to react to his impetus, to his stimulus, because they then turned on their captives. There was a lot of angst among the men, and everybody writes about it. I do recall the memoirs, reading the memoirs of Fred Anderson, for example, who was with him at Gallipoli and also on the Western Front. In his memoirs, he remarks on it. He remarks on the bravery of the man, how they're walking through, when they're walking along together, and he just sees that everybody flinches when there are bombs coming down. Jacka doesn't. He just keeps walking. And he was just amazed by that ability to not flinch. Well, I think that he would have been shocked by the adulation. He really was treated like a rock star when he came back. His 85-car cavalcade coming down St Kilda Road in 1919 toward the town hall in Swanson Street, with 4,000 people around the hall, bands playing, everybody jumping on his car, throwing rose petals at him. It was really what they called the Roman triumph entry into Melbourne. It's like some emperor had returned triumphantly. So that was just all too much for him. and he was a shy man, and took him a while, I think, to work through that shyness. And I think all the experiences in your life after that, he had to get used to public speaking, for example, because he was called on to speak so many times, so just get used to it. And getting married, running the business, which he did with a couple of his AIF mates. All of that would have added to his confidence in that regard. Just being a success for a while there anyway, until the business collapsed, at which time I think he had probably the biggest worries of his life when the Great Depression arrived. I mean, you had about 50,000 people out in the streets, right? That would have been a lot more. It would have been a much bigger funeral had it not been 108 point something degrees that day. I mean, it was a really stinking hot day. And there were bushfires all around Melbourne on the day. So there would have been a haze in the sky. So it was a huge funeral, particularly in those circumstances. And huge in the sense that, you know, you had 1,000 diggers marching there. Colonel Dare was marching, and you had the 8 Victoria Cross winners as the pallbearers, but then you had another group of 8 who were his actual close friends, who were also pallbearers. There were 2 groups. It was a massive funeral in that sense, yeah.
The nation was seized with a sense of shock and loss. They gave him a fitting funeral with full military honours. Melbourne came to a halt as dense crowds lined the city streets and the entire length of St Kilda Road.
I remember Jacka's funeral. I was one of the pallbearers with other VC members. And as we marched alongside the casket, conscious of what a great Australian we were honouring that day.
Yeah, I remember the day Jacka died. I was very sad and keen to go to the funeral. I had a job to get off, but got off eventually, and felt very proud to be one of the 40 men able to attend the funeral, although it was a very, very sad day for us all. We went along St Kilda Road at 4 deep and assembled at the grave. I would say hundreds around the grave where he was buried, and I felt very, very upset, very proud and disappointed to think we'd lost Jacka.
Bill and his father were left-wing, and Albert probably was when he started. But I think that Albert was impacted by that whole experience, drawn up effectively into the bosom of the British Empire. I think that he took a turn to the right, effectively. Not the extreme right, though. He certainly wasn't that ilk. But he became something of a conservative in that sense, a very compassionate conservative. Because as the mayor of St Kilda, he had a lot of time for the unemployed, and he worked a lot on ameliorating the condition of the unemployed during the Great Depression, and he sacrificed a lot for that as well. When he was a councillor on the St Kilda Council, he pushed for private-public partnerships for the pool there, the St Kilda pool. Yes. Well, yeah. Obviously, although they were, ideologically by that stage somewhat estranged, I think that that he was very, very emotionally related to his brother and the impact that it had, particularly at Pozières, And you know, that film that was done by Ross Cooper and Nigel Buist, that film luckily records that moment at Pozières when Albert, having received 7 wounds in that action, was lying on a stretcher, and Bill recounts many years later how he came up to that stretcher and saw his brother and just thought that he wasn't going to make it. By Jove, you've had it, you know, and so on. And he's got tears in his eyes as he says that.
And I found him eventually at the advanced first aid post in Sausage Gully. He was just about to be loaded into the ambulance. I've never seen anybody look so terrible in my life. He'd been shot through the nose. In fact, it looked as though he'd been shot everywhere. His face, all through the years when I have thought of it, I've thought of Albert's face as being a lump of lard. It was absolutely bloodless. And I thought, by Jove, you've had it, Albert. I won't won't see you again.
He idolised his brother in that sense, because he also mentions that his brother was against the senseless slaughter that was taking place on the Western Front in Gallipoli.